Morgan, you has a hand up.
Yes, thank you. Can everyone hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Okay, sometimes my micro isn't working. Okay, thank you so much, Graham, for the very nice chapter. I learned a lot, specifically on the historical perspective that you gave. It's very, very helpful and very useful. I had a question. Maybe I missed the part where you explained the whole project because this chapter gets room into a whole project, a book project, right? So why I'm not sure my question will be so relevant, but just I put it there and then you tell me.
Okay.
How is your perspective on the essence of money? How could it be useful to people wanting to understand today contemporary money definitions, what money is today? And I have in mind all the questions that arise today as to what money is in the context of shadow money. So money that is not yet money, but that is used as a level for credit or as a level for value in the context of financial markets, financial institutions, providing um, hybrid collections of debts to pay for things, to promise things, and to provide value for in exchange in transactions. That is not yet money. That is not set to be money by the central bank. This is near money or yet to be money. All these new ways of providing value that is not yet money or yet to be money. How does because I know there is a lot of questioning in sociology, in political economy, in political finance about what money is today and how could we contour the definitions, the limits of what money is. How could your work on the essence of money, does it fit there? Does it fit in, can this enlighten the debates about what money is today? Or is your perspective mostly historical? And just my question is mostly about where do you stand on those debates and how do you connect to these debates about what current money is, contemporary money is?
Great. Thank you for the question. I'm inclined to answer your question by pointing back to Aaron's initial question and thinking a little bit about the Hicksian answer that money is what money does. Maybe for questions concerning things like shadow money, things that central bankers would describe as near money. When I was answering Aaron's question and saying it may not scratch our explanatory itch to simply stop with the functions of money, and we might want to go down to thinking about the two theories and going on and thinking about its history. And it's clear from the chapter, I think, that history is a good way of approaching what otherwise might be straightforwardly metaphysical questions. For your particular question, and maybe this is just a little bit of a naive or naively idealistic way of thinking about the law, the way that the law could work. The hope for the non-historical metaphysical analysis part of the chapter would be that it's something that someone who wanted to make an argument that, no, near money really is money, or no, near money really isn't money at all, could pick up the analysis that comes from the functions, have that function argumentatively as a definition, and then just take an instance and see whether the definition applies or not. I mean, the way that the chapter proceeds, I would think, I would need to know more about the technicalities of how shadow money works. But if it's denominated in a recognized unit of account and is being used as a means of liquid payment, and then is held on by the party that receives it liquidly, like, I don't know what else it needs to do to count as money. And if that matters from a regulatory perspective for treating it as one class of thing as opposed to a different kind of asset, then that's that. Now, again, that's me not knowing about how law intersects with practice, especially in an international context. Maybe that's just a naive, like, we make the laws and we apply it sort of view. But I think that would be the hope, is that that portion of the project could be taken and applied in that sort of way.
Morgan, can you mention your field?
Sorry, I'm political philosophy and political economy.
Oh, cool. Yeah. And Soli, by the way, didn't mention his field. But you're a philosopher, right? Yeah, cool. I happen to know. Yeah. So James, his hand up is next, and I saw Jessica had her hand up too. But so James, go ahead.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I'm a PhD student in government, and I have 2 master's degrees in philosophy. So I'm sort of bridging the divide between philosophy and politics and economics. But really,
you've come to the right place. So
yeah. So I guess my question is really about sort of the structure of the chapter, and I'm really looking forward to reading the whole book. And I don't focus exclusively on money in my work, so maybe this question is sort of procedural in the sense of like I'm wondering why you go about setting out the plot of the story that you narrate in the way that you do. So I think that it's interesting that you start out with this description of Cephalus and how he comes to think about what money is and how his relationship with the other ancient Greeks determines the nature of what he thinks about money. But the question that I had was, I'm not certain what explanatory work the reference to these ancient philosophers does in the context of, similar to what Morgan was talking about, the modern interpretation of what we understand money to be. So of course, it's crucial to understand what money was historically, because that's the origins of our notion of money. It's the origins of our understanding of how money works in the world and why we value money in the ways that we do. And I see that as incredibly valuable, but I think that it could be vital to sort of push the dial a little bit further with regards to the relevance of the ancient philosophers that you bring up, the Aristotelians and those people, because it's not entirely clear to me upon reading the chapter exactly why we were starting with those individuals. Because, and it's not that I don't think that their views weren't important. They're crucial, but I think that you could develop them further and relate them much more clearly and much more carefully to the contemporary economists such as Schumpeter and the other monetarists that you describe later on in the chapter. Because I think there's a variety of things that there's a variety of questions that you can ask. So what money is sort of what you start out with, and that's quite a rudimentary question, if it is at least a philosophical and metaphysical question. But often we want to know, and possibly this could be something that you're working on towards the end of the book, I'm not sure, but we might want to know what money can be, what money should be. What is the ideal account of what money is, and why is it important now for us to understand what money is, and not less important for us to understand what people thought in the past about what the essence of money was. So I know there's a variety of thoughts there, but I don't know how you'd react to those statements.
yeah, great. Well, I appreciate them. Makes me wonder how much of the use of the Cephalus and Socrates device I want to make explicit, and how much I want to just let it run and hope at least some readers go along for the ride and maybe see what I was thinking, or maybe find different ways of using it. So here's at least 3 things that I've got in mind for the device of Socrates and Cephalus as they move through. First, I want to open with a reminder this is for the audience here is philosophers. The audience for this particular point is philosophers. The audience for the book, I hope, is as broad as everybody here and broader, but the audience for this particular point is philosophers who maybe open up Republic, arguably the first great work in the history of Western philosophy, and skip right over the Cephalus bit and start getting into more substantive discussions of justice that ignore that the very first definition that is considered in the book for what justice is, which is the central question for the book, is that justice is telling the truth and paying your debts, right? And that idea that there is some deep conceptual connection between the nature of justice and debt repayment never goes away in the history of philosophy. It's why David Graeber writes his book in 2011 that's called Debt. It's why he devotes an entire chapter in that book to Nietzsche. And that's why the second part of the genealogy, Nietzsche explores debt as like the fundamental social structure for any kind of moral relation, like takes that seriously as a possibility. Like Nietzsche was not the first to come up with that thought. That thought can be located at the very, very, very beginning of history. So one is a thought to as a telling philosophers, hey, pay attention to the very beginning of Republic. And when you pay attention, note that money is right there at the very beginning of the history of philosophy. And you philosophers in general, political philosophers, moral philosophers, but especially those who are trying to work at the intersection of those sorts of things, ought to take money seriously. If, let's argument by authority, I suppose, but if Plato started there, why can't you at least acknowledge that fact and think about why that might have been the case? So that's one reason. Second reason that the device itself is used, which is less particular to the characters in Republic as to using any two characters, speaks to Zoli's point. Those moving through definitions of money, and in particular, the history that I've got in mind is the history of the debate between chartalists and commodity theorists, or metalists and cartalists, whatever labels you put. It's a mess because people don't use the labels in a consistent manner to define what their theories are, what they think their opponents are, what would count as evidence in favor of one view or another. So it's like Dante moving through hell, right? Where the reader is meant to identify with Dante and to have Virgil moving him around so they can see what hell is like. I try to take Cephalus through the hell of the literature that is, what are the two theories of money? And let the reader be able to identify with Cephalus and say, yeah, I guess those two things don't mean the same thing, even though they're kind of related and they're parading under around the same label. My hope is that it'll be, I really appreciated Zoli's thanks to me that it worked as a way of moving him as someone unfamiliar through the debates. Because if you just pick up somebody who starts talking about the commodity theory without that lack of historical understanding about where the theories have come from, it's easy to imagine that it means one and the same thing to everybody and everybody's debating the same thing. So part of that is just trying to give naive readers a way through the literature. Yeah, sorry, I had 3 points to make, but the third point I made in this is, I already gestured at it. In chapter 4, when I do the Nietzschean genealogy in a way of explaining the symbolic function of money, I spend a lot of time, or will, when it gets written, we'll spend a lot of time talking about the connections between debt and indebtedness and justice in general, and how Nietzsche has got his finger on that. And then that will be an opportunity for the character Cephalus to be like, oh yeah, that's where we started off way back in chapter 1. So at least chapters 1 and 4 will arc the character together through there and make connections. I've just kind of got them wandering through chapters 2 and 3 right now. And so there is more work to be done to really make there be payoff. But anyway, those are the reasons that I've taken that as a device that I'm using in the book.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Jessica has her hand up.
Hi.
Hello. Your field, Jessica?
Oh, philosophy.
Okay.
So you're in a situation where we want to do some conceptual analysis of a concept that people made up, and there's like a shitload of verbal disputes that are just screwing up the debate. And I wonder if it might be helpful to like look at like a less loaded analogy as just a way of like thinking through the structure of how the problem with conceptual analysis is happening. So like, here's just like, I offer this to see if this is like a helpful way of thinking through. What is a sighting in bird watching? Like there are birds, right? And in the past, there was like a very clear folk concept of what counted as a bird sighting. And like experts would debate it about whether or not like hearing a bird song would count as a sighting or not. And the expert debates, the kind of like ideal, generic, or whatever, would count from the underlying folk concept in some way. And it would also have to account for like the genealogy and like what we counted in the past. Like it was like including that stuff. And it would also have to be like mapping onto the folk concept, but it couldn't just be reporting the folk concept from the birdwatching community, because then you couldn't be consistent across cases and it wouldn't be parsimonious. And so the genealogy matters because the folk concept matters for the conceptual analysis, but the folk concept has all these verbal disputes and stuff. So you got to like clean it up a little bit. And so then you might think like, why do we need to clean it up a little bit? Well, because the concept of a bird sighting matters for bird watching status when people say that they're like elite birders, right? And so there's like
Right. Yeah.
coming out that like what comes from settling what the concept is. So it does play a functional role, but the idealization is necessary for the concept to play the functional role because the underlying folk concept is going to be on its own insufficient for it to play the functional role it needs to in the bird watching community. And
Yeah.
now there's all this new technology like telephoto lenses and like apps that will identify bird songs for you. And so the folk concept is like even more messy because of new technology. And it's increasingly difficult to have a parsimonious, coherent definition that's consistent across cases due to technical. But people still agree with like night and day cases, and they still agree with the functional role, but the concept is like way more fuzzy. And so there's like kind of like ontic vagueness in the concept. Now, this is getting back to the money point. I kind of think that might be what's going on with money is that there's new technology that challenges what we would have thought as like the candidate idealizations about money that would enable us to like use the concept to play a functional role for like public policy making around money and stuff.
Right.
Now, there's just like way more ontic vagueness around the concept, which has always been there because of like new technology and stuff. And so these like underlying disputes between different analyses or interpretations of the folk concept by the experts become like way higher stakes. And like, here's my thought for you. It's like, why, it seems like you might want to say like, we still do need to figure it out though. We can't live with ontic vagueness. We can't live with like a concept that's like not perfectly precisified or something. But why not?
Yeah.
Because yeah, like we can just kind of muddle through with like these vague concepts. And as long as we have like night and day, like this is money, this is not, that's a bird sighting, that's not. The Merlin app, the telephoto lenses, like these are edge cases, but like we have like a pretty good concept of the case. So like it'd be helpful for the money example if like there was a problem that the persistent ontic vagueness was causing for the concept of money, given the functional role that the concept of money has to play.
So you're thinking, okay, so that was awesome. Very, very cool example. Thank you. On the very, very, very last bit, you were thinking that what the bird sighting case demonstrates is that even if there is going to be there's a certain kind of vagueness that's inevitable, still decisions need to get made, at least in some cases, about what does and doesn't count, because within the community, the status of having had a sighting matters to the folks that are in the community, right? Like, so like not everyone is just going to live with vagueness all the way through, all the way down, right? So, and you were inviting me to find an analog for that in the money case where, so, I mean, maybe I would go back to the Morgan's point earlier. It's going to matter for regulation in all kinds of contexts, right? So I would think that finding cases where deciding upon the vagueness matter, or like giving criteria that would allow one to like sort the vague cases into one versus the other shouldn't be too hard. So does saying what the regulators need to do to figure out shadow banking, cryptocurrency, and the like, does that provide the kind of thing that you're looking for, is like why it would matter to sort out the vagueness?
Well, this is my wondering, because for bird watching, I understand why we need to settle these questions, because there's like a hierarchy of bird watching status that we all need to figure out. But for money, I kind of think we might be able to tolerate some of the vagueness underlying in the concept, because I kind of think that the concept should be beholden to this other concept of like justice or like some other thing we care about. And so like, as long as like the money concept is playing the functional role of money, okay. And then we can just kind of determine, we don't need to do conceptual analysis to make the vague concept more precise. We might just need to figure out what justice requires and then think about that thing and then just make the concept however we want to make it as a way that's conducive to justice in the limits of the night and day ways that the concept can operate.
One thing, sorry, if you don't mind, one thing that comes to mind here that is potentially disanalogous, but then maybe can be made analogous between the case of money and the case of bird watching, is that, so you might think like, well, look, let's get back to what is money used for? It's used to, in exchange for goods and services, and it's used to pay off debts. So if one party is willing to accept something denominated in a unit of account that the two parties agree to in order to exchange a good or pay off a debt, then who cares what the definition of money is? Like, the debt has been cleared, the good has been exchanged without conflict, we're done. And so you would get a analogy because there's something, I take it that for the bird watching case, two people agreeing, hey, we saw the bird, isn't going to please the community as a whole if no one else agrees to the standard that the local individuals have applied to saying that they said the bird. What's going to count as acquiring whatever status is acquired from having seen the bird has to be publicly recognized. But then that makes me think about a paper that Aaron recently published in Synthese, I think, about how to define what payment is. And you might think that for something to count as payment, as opposed to mere exchange, that there has to be some kind of community recognition that's involved with it, because what we want to do is we want to scale the concept of payment up so that it is a legally recognized concept. So if there's disputes about whether or not someone has paid one another or not, we can turn and look what happened and see whether it qualifies as satisfying the conditions for payment or not. Aaron, that's your view. Like, the important thing about payment is that there is some kind of this other recognition. So that gets like the analog to the bird watching community right? Those who would be caring about whether or not the particular thing that had happened qualifies as payment or not. Okay, cool. I don't know. Great. That's a really, really nice example, though. I really like it. Thank you.
Morgan, you had a follow-up. I can follow up as well, but Morgan, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, please, Aaron, you can follow up. I'll go on later.
Oh, okay. Well, no, I was just going to suggest that at some point you might need to just engineer based on justice, as Jessica's put it in the chat nicely. But there is a way that you could sort of tighten up the definition of money so that you get more of things like shadow banking or short-term promissory, like debts, contracts that are now shadow money, get called shadow money, into the picture. And this came up with a kind of expository point that I thought was too small to be worth mentioning. But the definition you gave in the chapter by Martin, where he's talking about IOUs and what makes money is that they're negotiable. And I thought that the example you give is where it's sort of like widely negotiable, like it's widely used in settling debts. But just negotiability is like Joe owes me something, and then I owe you something, and I can use Joe's debt to me to settle my debt with you. Now we just negotiate. That's a negotiable promissory note. That won't be money, right? In that just three-person case. So that Martin definition could be the start of a definition, but you'd want to add something further condition or conditions, something like widely accepted or something like that as in settlement of debts. And wide acceptance might have a couple dimensions too. Wide acceptance could be the scope of the parties that will accept it, right? And it could also be the set of debt obligations that can be discharged.
Right.
So those two dimensions are different. So you can add in, but those dimensions are what now, like, how do you define those things? Well, that's still back to vagueness, right? But you can at least add that as a condition, those dimensions of a condition, which have to be specified based on emerging technology, changing conditions and stuff like that. And that sort of at least sort of plausibly reins in the degree of vagueness, so that or sharpens the question that where the boundary cases are going to arise. And then maybe you have to engineer based on justice, but you can do something like more of a mix between like regulation that's premised on regulating money and money creation, and then what we ought to do, or something like that. Anyway, those are just quick thoughts. And those, by the way, I think that connects with, I was going to connect it also with Cameron's earlier comments and links in the chat about how to define monetary aggregates, including shadow money. Sorry, dog barking at the worst time. By their different liquidity profiles. She put links in there. And that, I think that's consistent with what I was just saying. So it fits, that's a nice way of like sort of sharpening some of the regulatory questions that have to do with classifying these different sort of debt obligations, and whether their degree of moneyness is it. That's another way to make it vague, is like make it money-like or moneyness, and make this a spectrum. But yeah. Anyway, sorry. Morgan.
Yeah, sorry. My point is very tiny, very small. Based on what you just said about moneyness. So I just wanted to ask if there was room in your argument for a more institutional perspective on the definitions of money. How could regulation and institutions perspective on what money is fit in your analysis or your definitions of the essence of money? It seems that you attach some virtue, you give some virtue to the definition of Hicks that Aaron James just refreshed for us. Money is what money does, or there are some other sources that state the same thing. Money is what money does. Okay, right. But money is what money does so long as institutions authorize it. So you have to fit
Right.
this systematic vision in the frame of regulation and authorization. I have in mind, and that I think builds a bridge with what Cameron just shared. I have in mind the way that banks, commercial banks, refinance when they get money from source of money from the central bank. So on the money market, they provide collateral, and in exchange for which they get money for their very short-term operation. And there exists a collateral framework that states what they can give in exchange to get money, to get immediate money, MO. So that means that regulation is at the very basis of defining what counts as
Right.
a monetary unit or as a monetary equivalent. That is in direct opposition with Hicks' definition in a way,
Right.
but also it makes room for it. So how would you
Yeah, good. Okay. First off, my apologies for leaning my head down and my ear in. You are a little quiet, so I have to like get my head onto my speakers there. So I'm attentive, paying close attention, not zoning out when my head is down like that. I take that one way of maybe reformulating the issue that's at the heart of your question is how do we use maybe there's a problem of using the Hicks definition if we attempt to use it in the way that I was suggesting to guide regulation, because using the definition as a way of codifying into regulation what isn't going to count as money, actors are going to immediately respond to that codification by doing the things that they wanted to do. And if it will be useful to them to do the things that they wanted to do without money because of, I don't know, tax purposes or something like that, they're going to do that, right? So the economists here can tell me if I've got this right. Is it Gooden's law that like the second that you put something that was that is a regulation into your model in order to make it predictive, or it's the other way around? I'm screwing it up here, but it's like the generic philosophical point is like when you take what is supposed to be specifying how an entire system works and then put it into the regulatory schema and then expect the system to work exactly the same way, that is a bad prediction to make, because the actors within the system are going to react to the implementation of that codification and start behaving in ways to, as it were, get around the rules, right? So whatever is right about that way of thinking about taking a sort of total system level analysis of the way that something is behaving, specifying the categories of the things within it and the rules according to which those things are supposed to move, and then trying to use that as the basis of policy, you should expect that people are going to start doing different things right off the bat. Now, where does it matter at that point how we define money? I think it depends on what hat we've got on. If we're the regulators, I think the hat is like, well, we've got these regulations in place and they're not doing what we want them to do. We need to alter the definition. How are we going to alter the definition? Well, maybe we would turn to the theorists and hope that the theorists are adjusting their theories of the relevant categories to characterize the phenomenon in the new ways that are responding to what had initially happened. Or maybe there's a categorization that was already sufficiently generic that can just be tapped back into to put in. So does that address the kind of question you were asking? Did I hear you the right way? The fact that I can't say Gooden's law correctly tells you that I'm like just learning about this stuff and trying to figure it out. So any recommendations on things to read would be really, really valuable.
Cameron notes that it's good heart.
Good heart. There we go. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I got the got the first 4 letters right. Thank you, Cameron.
If I may suggest a reading, and sorry, my mic is very bad.
That's okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, great. I suggest readings of Daniela Gabor.
Oh, sure. Right. Okay, great.
Yeah, for good readings on how current monetary units are very difficult to understand.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.